Hello and welcome to this presentation on the rights of nature and the Great Lakes and State Waters Bill of Rights, which is currently in the New York State Assembly. My name is Anna Castengay, and I'm the co-chair of the Western New York Environmental Alliance and a member of the Rights of Nature Western New York group, which is organizing around the Bill of Rights with the help of CELDF, the Community Environmental Legal Defense Fund, who drafted the Bill of Rights with Assembly member Patrick Burke. This presentation is part of a toolkit that we put together for other groups who want to talk about the rights of nature and the Bill of Rights to their communities. In that toolkit, which is available on the Environmental Alliance website and linked in the description of this video, you will also find this PowerPoint with a script, handouts, and draft letters. Please feel free to use any of these resources, and also please reach out. This movement needs all of us working together. The goal of this presentation is to empower people to speak about the rights of nature and the Great Lakes and State Waters Bill of Rights to their friends, family, and networks. In this presentation, I'll review the background and history of the movement as well as what's in the Bill of Rights. And I ask that as you watch it, you think about how we can collectively support each other in having these ongoing discussions. I also want you to think about how rights of nature can connect with and support what is already meaningful to you in your community. Because in order to get people to change their hearts and minds, they have to internalize and personalize the message, not just think of it in theory. And while it is really important that you call your representatives and advocate for this bill, rights of nature is much more than a political campaign. It's actually a call for a paradigm shift, a culture change, a worldview, to humans seeing themselves as part of nature rather than separate. In order for us to move forward as a species, we have to change, or in many ways, remember how we relate to and view nature. We need to start treating trees, rivers, wildlife as non-human people who are deserving of rights and our respect. Most people who are interested in rights of nature are already passionate about and dedicated to a cause or issue, whether it is the environment or maybe public health, food systems, or benefiting their community in some way. Imagine what it would mean for you, your family, your community, your cause, if we lived as a life-affirming culture that honored and valued all life above financial gain or convenience. So why are we talking about rights of nature? Well, despite decades of environmental laws, we are continuing to see environmental degradation and an escalating meta crisis. For those of you who are not familiar with the term, meta crisis is where there are many local and global issues that are interrelated and compound on each other and make each crisis worse. An outcome of the meta crisis is the sixth mass extinction. We haven't faced this level of extinction event in 66 million years. Climate change is also causing more frequent natural disasters. Disasters that would occur once in every 100 years are now occurring multiple times a decade or even every year all over the US alone. It is also estimated that 95% of our soil will be degraded by 2050. Urban, suburban sprawl and overdevelopment is cutting down our forests, invading our green spaces, and polluting our waterways. Meanwhile, legal systems around the world have treated land and nature as property. Environmental protection laws like the Clean Air Act or Clean Water Act legalize a certain amount of pollution or ecosystem exploitation. It literally permits a certain amount of harm being done. So then why is it that corporations, which do not typically have universal well-being in mind, have rights, but nature, our home and what gives us life, does not? There are many people who now believe that small adjustments or incremental changes like carbon offsets, switching to renewable energy, or any change that otherwise maintains the status quo are not enough to change our trajectory from social, political, and environmental collapse. This is a quote from futurist R. Buckminster Fuller. You never change things by fighting the existing reality. To change something, build a new model that makes the existing model obsolete. And that is the paradigm shift that we are trying to achieve with rights of nature. We want to totally alter our current legal system and who is protected and what is valued and prioritized. So, what exactly is rights of nature? It's an international movement. And instead of viewing nature as property or resources to be used for human consumption, it recognizes ecosystems, so rivers, forests, lakes, wildlife, etc., as having rights, much like humans have rights or corporations have rights. This means that a river, mountain range, forest, watershed, or ocean could have the right to exist, flourish, regenerate, and evolve naturally without human caused disruption, granting them legal standing so that people and communities could defend those rights in court on behalf of the ecosystem. Rights of nature laws shift environmental governance from an exploitative, human centered, or anthropocentric approach to an ecocentric one. Rather than only regulating how much damage can occur, they aim to prevent environmental harm outright and prioritize the health of natural systems as equal to or above corporate interests. So, a little bit about the history of rights of nature now. Many indigenous communities worldwide have long seen humans as part of nature, not separate, and that we have duties to respect and care for the earth. This worldview involves treating Mother Earth as a living entity in and of herself and seeing aspects of nature like rivers and mountains as being alive as well. This worldview has entered into the scientific community in the early 1970s with James Lovelock and Lynn Margulis's Gaia theory, which from which Earth system science emerged and demonstrates that Earth systems are interconnected and work together to self-regulate, much like a living body would. So the living body of Earth. In other words, what happens in one part of the world impacts other parts, and losing one ecosystem or one species is a detriment to all. In Western law, the concept gained attention in the early 1970s as well. The famous law article, Should Trees Have Standing, in 1972 argued for the legal rights for nature. And over the past 2 decades, rights of nature has moved from theory to reality with actual laws being enacted. In 2008, Ecuador became the first country to constitutionalize the rights of nature. It recognized the rights of Pachamama, or Mother Earth, to maintain and regenerate its cycles, structure, functions, and processes. And citizens can demand and enforce those rights. It was established when a high court ordered Ecuador's government to revoke mining permits in a protected rainforest region. It's also important to note that the first rights of nature law actually passed in the entire world was in our neighboring state of Pennsylvania, but we'll get to that in a little bit. Bolivia's majority population of indigenous people view that nature is Mother Earth. And in 2012, it passed the Framework Law on Mother Earth and Integral Development to Live Well, granting legal personhood rights to nature and mandating that people must live in harmony with nature. New Zealand followed by recognizing a former national park in 2014 and the Whanganui River in 2017 as legal persons with spirit. The river has been long revered by the indigenous Maori as an ancestor. The river now rightfully owns herself, and she is represented by guardians, and her voice must be considered in decisions that impact her. In 2022, Panama passed a law that recognizes the rights of nature to exist, persist, and to regenerate, and the obligations of the country to incorporate this law into all forms of rules, regulations, and policies. In addition, in the case of doubt, all proceedings must be resolved in such a way as to favor protection and conservation of the environment, giving preference to less harmful alternatives to nature. Spain in 2022 passed the first rights of nature law in Europe, granting rights to the Mar Menor Lagoon. Other countries that have passed rights of nature laws include Colombia, Mexico, India, Bangladesh, Peru, Brazil, and Uganda. And this covers municipalities, waterways, or sometimes even the entire country's ecosystems. As of 2024, there were nearly 500 rights of nature initiatives in 40 different countries. And now we get to rights of nature in the Great Lakes region, which is a hotbed of rights of nature initiatives. This is a map showing all of the successful initiatives in the states surrounding the Great Lakes. After toxic algae blooms in Lake Erie poisoned Toledo, Ohio's drinking water supply and resulted in the water being shut down for 3 days in 2014, Toledo voters passed the Lake Erie Bill of Rights in 2019. This law legally treated the lake as a person, allowing citizens to act as legal guardians for Lake Erie and sue polluters on the lake's behalf. It passed with 61% of the vote, reflecting community outrage at agricultural runoff causing dead zones and green slimy water. A federal court did later strike the Bill of Rights down on procedural grounds. This Bill of Rights was drafted by CELDF, the same group that drafted the New York State Bill of Rights. So this was a big learning opportunity. And we are just moving forward from the Lake Erie Bill of Rights into something bigger and stronger. The Ho-Chunk Nation in Wisconsin in 2016 adopted rights of nature in their tribal constitution, and they were the first indigenous tribe located within the US boundaries to do so. In 2011, the town of Wales, New York, adopted a community rights ordinance enacted under New York State's Home Rule Act, establishing rights for residents and the environment, effectively banning fracking. This was also written with the help of CELDF, and this is an example of a binding law. In 2022, Potsdam passed a non-binding resolution granting legal rights to the Racket River that runs through town, paving the way for a binding rights of nature law to be passed, hopefully in the near future. This effort was led by Talking Rivers and the North Country Rights of Nature Group, another group in New York. And in 2024, a similar non-binding resolution was passed in Orleans, New York. While not technically in the Great Lakes watersheds, I do want to mention a few other important initiatives that are in blue here. The White Earth Band of Ojibwe in Minnesota recognized the rights of wild rice, or manoomin, as part of tribal law in response to the threat of an oil pipeline harming their waterways and therefore threatening wild rice. And the small and conservative borough of Tamaqua, Pennsylvania, was the first community in the entire world to enact a rights of nature ordinance in 2006 to stop toxic sludge dumping into their waterways. So this is proof that rights of nature is truly bipartisan. In 2010, Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania became the first major US city to embrace rights of nature when it passed a community bill of rights banning shale gas fracking. And in 2014, another very rural and very conservative town, Grant Township, PA, adopted a rights of nature law recognizing the rights of local ecosystems and the community's rights to be free from toxic trespass, which led to revoking a permit for a fracking company who eventually abandoned the project completely. So now on to the Great Lakes and State Waters Bill of Rights, which is effective statewide in New York State. The Great Lakes and the New York State watersheds are all protected underneath this Bill of Rights. And as a watershed, even though it has the term water and the Great Lakes in the name, a watershed encompasses all aspects of the ecosystem. So all aspects of nature within the state of New York are protected under this Bill of Rights. And this is just a summary of what it says. So the Bill of Rights states that the Great Lakes and New York State watersheds shall possess the unalienable and fundamental right to persist, exist, flourish, naturally evolve, regenerate, and be restored by culpable parties, free from human violations of these rights and unencumbered by legal privileges vested in property, including corporate property. They possess the right to be free from toxic trespass, which means intentional, unwitting, involuntary, or neglectful deposition of toxic or potentially toxic substances. They also possess the right to not be owned, privatized, or monetized, and will be emancipated from vested property rights if these inalienable rights are violated. So that includes things like carbon trading, natural asset companies, ecosystem services, and patenting of life forms. It also states that the people of New York State shall possess the right to a clean and healthy environment. These rights are self-executing and enforceable against private and public sectors, enforceable by state and local government and by the residents themselves. No permit, license, privilege, charter, or other authorization by government that violates them is deemed valid in New York State. Violation results in a fine of up to $500 per day and per violation. Violators are also held liable for harm done, measured by the cost of restoring the watershed or watersheds, at least to the status immediately before the actions were taken. This is paid to the state exclusively for restoration. Local and county governments can also enact and enforce rights of nature laws beyond this bill, including regulations and prohibitions free from state preemption, provided it does not restrict fundamental rights or weaken protections for natural persons, communities, or ecosystems. So it is important to note that this Bill of Rights only recognizes the rights. It does not necessarily create policy for how it will be enacted. That will be determined by the courts as our environment is protected by communities. It will also be enacted by the policies that individual municipalities choose to bring up. It's also important to note that treaty rights reserved to hunt, fish, and gather are not subject to this or any future local, county, or state laws. So this again is a summary of the Bill of Rights. You can find the full Bill of Rights on the New York State Assembly website, and it's also available on the Environmental Alliance website. And finally, I just want to leave you with a reflection because, again, this is much more than just advocating for the Bill of Rights, which may or may not pass at the state level. It is highly unlikely because of our current political climate, because the rights of nature is just such a threat to our current financial system. But it, again, is more about expressing this worldview where humans are part of nature and totally dependent on nature. And it's a worldview that humans have had since we started becoming humans, and we have just forgotten about. So, for this final reflection, to again internalize what this worldview would mean, I want you to imagine a future where ecosystems are seen as equal to people. What would your community look and feel like? How would things be different? And I want you to take that thought with you as you move forward in your advocacy for the rights of nature. Thank you.